Have you ever really stopped to think about what you have in common with, say, a giant redwood tree or even the tiniest little bacterium? Well, it all boils down to four fundamental types of giant molecules. These are the biological macromolecules that literally build and power every single living thing on this planet. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the one element that makes it all possible: carbon. From there, we'll dive into carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. And we'll wrap it all up with the nucleic acids that hold the very instructions for life itself. Ready? Let's get into it.
All right, first up, life's carbon foundation. Before we can talk about these incredible complex structures of life, we have to start with the single most important building block in the whole set, and that's the element carbon.
So why do we hear that phrase all the time? Carbon-based life. What is it that makes carbon so darn special? Well, it's not an accident. It all comes down to how it plays with others, chemically speaking. It has some unique bonding properties. See, carbon has 4 electrons in its outer shell, which means it can form 4 really strong, stable connections, or covalent bonds. This makes it kind of like the ultimate Lego brick. It can link up with itself to form long chains, create complicated branches, even loop back to form rings. It's the perfect scaffold for building the massive, complex molecules that life depends on. Okay, so with carbon as our super versatile backbone, we are ready to start building. Let's meet the 4 major classes of macromolecules that these amazing carbon skeletons help create. First on our list, carbohydrates. These are all about fuel and form. You've probably heard athletes talk about carb loading before a marathon, right? Well, there's a very good reason for that. These molecules are the body's go-to quick-access energy source. On a chemical level, carbohydrates stick to this simple little recipe. For every 1 carbon atom, you get 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. It's a simple formula, but you can use it to build all sorts of things, from simple sugars for instant energy to really tough structural materials. Now check this out, this is pretty cool. Molecules like glucose, galactose, and fructose are all simple sugars. What's absolutely wild is that they share the exact same chemical formula, C6H12O6. But just a tiny little tweak in how those atoms are arranged creates a completely different molecule. That little change is why fructose, for example, is so much sweeter than the others.
So, what happens when you link all those simple sugars together? You get these huge chains called polysaccharides. And here, shape is everything. If the chains are all branched, like with starch in plants or glycogen in animals, they become perfect for storing energy, easy to break apart when you need a boost. But if the chains are straight and packed together tightly, like cellulose in plants, they become incredibly strong building materials. We're talking about the stuff that gives plants their structure.
All right, let's switch gears to our next group, the lipids. Now, this is a pretty diverse bunch, but they all share one key personality trait. They're hydrophobic. That's just a fancy way of saying they do not like water at all. And this water-fearing property is actually their superpower. It's exactly why lipids are perfect for things like long-term energy storage, insulating our bodies to keep us warm, and, maybe most importantly, for building the protective membranes that surround every single one of our cells. You ever wonder what the real difference is between a stick of butter and a bottle of olive oil? It's all about molecular shape. Saturated fats, like butter, have these nice, straight chains that can pack together really tightly, which is why they're solid. But if you throw in a few double bonds, you get unsaturated fats. Those double bonds create little kinks in the chains, so they can't pack together as neatly. And that's why they stay liquid, like olive oil. And this brings us to the absolute rock star of the lipid family, the phospholipid. This molecule is just brilliant. It has a water-loving head and 2 water-fearing tails. So what does it do in water? It spontaneously arranges itself with all the tails pointing inward, away from the water, creating a perfect 2-layered barrier. We call that the cell membrane. It's an incredible self-healing shield. Okay, next up, let's talk about the real workhorses of the cell, proteins. If a cell is a bustling city, then proteins are the workers, the machines, and the communication network all rolled into one. They are by far the most versatile of all the macromolecules. Seriously, proteins do just about everything. They're the enzymes that speed up chemical reactions, they're the fibers that give our muscles and skin their strength, and they're the tiny molecular pumps and channels that move stuff across those cell membranes we just talked about. So how does a protein become one of these amazing little machines? Well, it all comes down to its shape. A protein's function is dictated by its incredibly complex, specific 3D structure. And that structure is built up in 4 distinct levels.
starting with just a simple, straight chain of building blocks called amino acids.
And you can really see that journey here. It starts with that primary sequence of amino acids. That sequence determines how the chain starts to fold and coil into local shapes, like helices and sheets. Then, the whole thing folds up even more into a final, complex 3D shape. And sometimes, a few of these folded chains will even team up to form a massive functional protein complex.
And you really can't overstate how critical that initial sequence is. I mean, think about this. A change in just one single amino acid out of a chain of nearly 600 in the hemoglobin protein is all it takes to cause the devastating genetic disease sickle cell anemia. It's a stark reminder that in biology, structure is everything.
And that brings us to our fourth and final group, the master molecules, the blueprint of life itself, nucleic acids. These are the keepers of the code. They contain every single instruction needed to build and operate an entire living organism.
Nucleic acids are built from monomers called nucleotides, and the two big ones you've heard of are DNA and RNA. You can think of them as the ultimate biological hard drive, the information storage system for the entire living world.
And here it is, the famous double helix of DNA. It really is like a twisted ladder. The two long sides are made of something called a sugar-phosphate backbone. And the rungs of the ladder? Those are pairs of nitrogenous bases. And they follow a very strict rule. Adenine, or A, always pairs with thymine, T, and cytosine, C, always pairs with guanine, G. This specific pairing is the secret to the entire genetic code.
So if DNA is the master blueprint, locked away safely in the cell's library, you can think of RNA as the temporary working copy. It's a single strand that carries the instructions out to the cellular machinery that actually builds the proteins. To do its job, it uses a slightly different sugar, and it swaps out the base thymine for a different one called uracil.
So let's zoom out and put this all together. The magic of life isn't about any one of these molecules on its own. It's about how they all work together. You've got carbohydrates for fuel, lipids creating boundaries and compartments, proteins doing all the work, and the nucleic acids providing all the instructions. It's just an incredibly beautiful and dynamic system.
And that really leaves us with a pretty profound final thought. The fact that all life we know of, from the simplest bacteria to us to a blue whale, is built from these same four molecular patterns, well, what does that tell you? It points to an elegant, efficient, and universal system that connects every single living thing on our planet, a testament to a deep, shared history.